They say that there are 3 levels of conversation. Level 1 is when people talk about other people. Level 2 is when people talk about events. There's nothing wrong with either of those, but this is Level 3 Studio. Level 3 is when people talk about ideas and what is possible. Welcome to Level 3 Studio, aka the Innovators Oasis, aka Chef Jay's Kitchen, where we feed your body, feed your mind without a doubt, feed your soul. Let's take a toast. Cheers. And I am immeasurably humbled and grateful for each of you being present, being here. So cheers to a good conversation. Cheers. All right, let's get right to it. Race.
Shit. Right.
All right, around the table we have Dan Smith, the helper of people. He is the co-creator of the Porterhouse KC, a movement built to serve underserved populations in the area of entrepreneurship. Chris Rawson, Truth Seeker, Executive Director, Teach for America KC. Nathaniel Bozarth, University Marketing Specialist, Producer. Bakari Uku'u, the Liberator. Came to liberate some minds. I'm excited. Middle School Vice Principal, and as always, Pat Rob 2 Raw, aka Late Nights with 3 Z's. Don't forget the 17. Elevating creative expression. All right, fellas, gentlemen. Dan, I'm gonna come give it to you hot, man. First question. Right. But I'll ask, you can answer it one of 2 ways, right? Like, how would you describe the perfect 24-hour day? Perfect, just like overwhelmingly perfect, and then bring it down. And how would you describe the most productive 24-hour day?
Should have probably asked for the questions prior to. Now I feel some kind of way, like, you know, if that's gonna come out. I don't know.
All right, we'll work our way into it, man. What's something that you have to have? Like, in a perfect day, what's something that has to be in there?
Let's try to do this.
Yeah.
In a perfect day, I think one element that has to be there is the connection with my wife and kids. Straight up, no question. So that keeps me grounded, keeps me focused. I don't think that I would be where I am now without having the knowing that I have 2 kids to help support and to help grow and get them to be where they want to be or where they can be in life. And my wife, you know, that's the partner. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
How old are your kids? How many kids do you have?
I have 2 boys. 2 boys. One 7th grade, 13. One fifth grade, 11. So those are my guys.
Are they giving you trouble right now? Like 13?
Like not at all.
Easing into those teenagers?
They are really, really good. Totally different than what I was.
What were you like as a teenager?
I was mischievous. I wasn't bad, you know what I mean? But I was mischievous.
Have you had the talk with your boys?
You know what? I have had the talk no, let me not lie. Okay.
Right. They're going to watch this.
Right. We've had pieces of talks.
Is it because you don't need to?
I mean, he has black boys. That's real.
The thing is...
Oh, okay. You're talking about a different talk.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
There's 2 different talks.
You're talking about different talks.
There's 2 different talks.
So answer however you feel is most appropriate.
Okay. So the one talk we've had, so as me being a father of 2 black young men, or soon to be black young men, I think you have to have that talk at an early age, just simply because you don't. Obviously, the news is out there. Obviously, there's conversation at school. Obviously, there's all these other influences and things that are going to happen or going to occur. I'd rather them learn from us, right, out of love, in a love setting, than out of a situation of necessity.
Mm-hmm. Now, Dan, as a resident white person, I just want to say there are many white people who do not understand that there are 2 talks.
Okay.
In fact, I thought there was only, in this moment, I was like, oh, the sex talk.
Right.
But then as soon as Bakari said, somebody said 2 talks.
Yeah. True. Yeah. No, that's true.
So can you just define for white people what the 2 talks are?
For everybody, just in context, right? So one is obviously is the sex talk, and then the other is growing up black in America.
Because I have had that talk with kids.
Yeah.
Like kids that I serve, that you are a black boy You cannot afford to do certain actions because people are already looking at you in a certain kind of way. And so that not being a father and having to have that conversation with my black students, my black male students particularly, is it blows my mind. That
let me ask you this though: is there any do you push that for yourself or for your students, where it's like, are you willing to test the line of what's acceptable, or like, no, this should be acceptable, we should be able to do this, or do you play it safe and say, you know, better, it's just best to stay away from, or are you trying to?
The only way to play it safe is to change the system, and so I engage fully in conversations that I feel like my kids need to have. Period. I have to give them the strategies and tools necessary to be, one, aware of the game that we have to play, so they can become then a part of that game, so they can shift the game.
Yeah.
So,
Chris, I'm curious from your perspective, and I'll stray from this as much as I can, but from your perspective as an executive director, or one that tends to give directions, right? Like, how do you, in giving directions, knowing that the choices you make and the things that you ask other people to carry out has that trickle down impact? How conscious of that are you, and what decisions do you intentionally make in this regard when instructing, whether it be the folks working for TFA or for who you know they will go impact?
So I think two things there. One is that I think what you're asking about is how we go about training our educators.
Right.
To be able to deal with these types of
training?
conversations, whether they share the affinity of their students or they don't, right? And so we spend a lot of time, heavy investment, both financial, time. We don't stop with just giving folks information on their own identity development, on culturally responsive teaching and pedagogy. We don't stop there. We also, from our coaches, our teacher coaches that go out and they assess the performance of our folks, they use a tool, CRIOP, which I always forget what it always stands for, but it's culturally responsive instruction and OP, something OP. But it's out, this nationally tool is available, and so they use that to assess the classrooms and the teaching and the learning environment that they're seeing, right, in action, so that they can help push the application of what they're learning. I think though the part that and I think that's the only way you can get there, is you have to have a really keen and growing and ever evolving understanding of self, and also a keen interest and curiosity and asset-based mindset when it comes to folks that don't share your specific background identities. I think that's the only way that I think that's where that starting from a point of you all have intrinsic value, and I do as well, and I want to understand that. I think that's the only place the place you start from. I do think that I do take a little bit, not issue with, but I do think is a little different, which is, so being executive director, I don't actually see my job as issuing orders or mandates, right? I don't see it that way at all. I actually very much see that my job is to be the steward of the flame, right? So whatever the organization is, what's the ultimate, the higher prize that we're after? And so in our case, that's educational equity for all students, right? So if that's the ultimate prize, then I think my job is to steward a process where we get super clear about how we're going to go about achieving that, and then making sure that the conditions are right, and I'm attracting the right folks to come be part of that work together, and then really making sure the conditions are there that every individual can both contribute in a meaningful way and live into their fullest potential and bring all their gifts to the work. That's actually how I see my role, and less about dictating mandates
I'm just curious, like, how do you deal with theoretically well-meaning white folks who come in as white saviors? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I don't know that we just deal with this with white folks, right? That I think all folks from any background that gets involved in education, I think you have to check what their intentions are, what their motivations are. And so if their motivations are to come from a place of doing to as opposed to doing with, if they're coming from a place of offering as opposed to empowering, that's
Chef Jay, that's the entrance you're gonna make.
What's up?
Chef, he wants Chef Jay.
I feel like I haven't been here in like.
Chef Jay's in the building.
Hey, you messing my mojo on the answer a little bit?
He was
You're bringing in hot, but you're bringing the food. And all is forgiven. All is forgiven.
He was coming in.
Hold on, what was the last thing you said?
I was rolling. Come on now. I can't recreate that genius.
You started with saying that it's not just white people.
Yeah, okay, so everybody has to check. So I think if you're coming from a place where I'm offering something too, as opposed to what you're offering is really trying to empower and elevate the folks that you are wanting to do work with, I think that's the mindset shift. So we spend a lot of time really intentionally starting, again, regardless of racial identity background, regardless of socioeconomic status background, regardless of affinity across any aspect, we spend a lot of time having folks get really, really clear on the why of what they're doing. Why are you doing this?
There's a difference between having a well-managed classroom and a well-led classroom, right? And so we focus a lot in urban education about classroom management. How do you keep them controlled and contained?
Keep them from busting the windows out the building.
And as I think about like being a liberator in education and like being a leader in education is how do we lead a classroom so that because leaders empower and even though that's problematic, but leaders help people tap into their best selves, right? And like they help them leverage their talents in a way that changes outcomes long term. And so as longevity. A teacher, it is my job, and as an educator, it became my goal to no longer manage my kids to fit the mold of what white America said is successful black. It became my job to be a leader that says that you can be whatever the fuck you want to be, and it's my goal to help you be that the best way you can. And so if you want to be a McDonald's worker because that's what your mama is, then I'm going to help you figure out, well, how can you actually become a McDonald's worker that owns McDonald's, right? That you are creating systemic change within your locus of control, as I was taught to say, and within your local family. And so
sense of agency.
Literally, like that's how do you access that and leverage it in a way that changes outcomes for not just you, but the people who come after you.
Here, I want to hear a lot more about Dan, and in particular to this though, right? Like this idea of, you said a movement built to serve underserved populations in the area of entrepreneurship. And there's, for the sake of it, right, these buzzwords around entrepreneurship of critical thinking or problem solving and I think a lot of it goes to, especially for underserved communities and entrepreneurship, goes to a sense of agency, a sense of belonging. Like what are when you think about empowering those communities, what are you focusing on?
So this is a theme I kind of put out there, and I've been on a little bit. I don't think you guys follow me on social media. I like put out little videos and stuff. I create my own videos. That's kind of an outlet for me. But one that I just did recently was Will Smith. You probably saw that video of him talking about fear, where he jumped out the plane and all that. Everybody's seen that video. So I thought about that, and it's so true, and it resonates with me. And so I created this video. I put that little snippet where he was talking about, God created the most beautiful things on earth on the other side of fear, right? And so I started thinking about that and what did that mean to me? And it is like the fear of I talked about having my boys, right? Initially being a parent, right? Never thought about being a parent before. So that was scary to me, to have not one, but two young men that I have to raise. Another thing was I put out my wife. My wife's an educator. She's a vice principal too at a school district. And like yourself, I can imagine that there's fears of being right or doing the right things or making the right statements or guiding the right direction, guiding youth in the right direction. And like you said, you had to transition from teaching to conform to teaching for empowerment, teaching for self-liberation, right? That's a major shift, and that's a fear. Like, what are people going to say about this? So fear, living on the other side, like there's so many beautiful things on the other side of fear that it's the same thing with entrepreneurship. And I feel like there's barriers built up and these walls built up based on, like you said, the educational system and policing and all these other things that have put the underserved population in this place, that they're scared. A lot of people are scared now of some of the most basic things and scared of trying to achieve some goals, right? Actually goal setting and actually doing something that they feel like in their mind, they see it, but now how do you do it? How do you obtain that? How do you get to that level? And you walk into, and I'm not going to name any places, but you walk into some places that you don't feel comfortable in, right? If you're a person of color, right? You don't feel like you're going to get the same service. Or I've been in those situations where I walked in and I felt uncomfortable, right? In certain instances. And so how do you get beyond that? Make people feel comfortable coming into your environment. And so that's what we're trying to do with the Porterhouse. There's no premise. You don't have to suit and boot to come into our environment. You don't have to know the verbiage, the language. You don't have to know what a ROI means, right? I'm going to teach you those things, right? Because my thing is, it's all about education. So that's what we've been doing for the last 11 months, 10 months. We've been doing these speaker series events where we bring consummate professionals in. And I have a conversation with those individuals and let them know we're meeting people where they are. So try not to speak over people, but actually speak to the people, right? So I had a marketer come in and we talked about marketing and branding, what that looks like, brand development. We had a lawyer come in and talked about actually starting a business. We had, I brought Davin and Shakia, Davin from AltCap and Shakia in from UMB Bank to talk about financing and try to reduce the fear of money, of what banking looks like and what financing looks like, right?
Unfamiliarity.
Right. There's a nervousness and all these things that are barriers, right? Because we don't feel like we talk the way that we should talk in a certain environment. I don't want you to feel that way. I feel like you can find success in being who you are, right? But putting hard work in to obtain and achieve the goal that you set for you. Yeah, code switching for me, I grew up on 33rd and Jackson, right? In the city, right? All my life, born and raised. Low to moderate income area. My mom did well for us, took care of us, got us right. And afforded me the opportunity. I went to a private school in high school, went to college, got a degree, got an undergraduate, got my master's degree, and felt like that was it. That's all I needed, right? I got these tools, right? And I'm ready. So I worked in corporate America for like 10 years and I always got the carrot. Let's put Dan in this leadership development program. He's an awesome guy. Yada, 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 yada. Let's get him his carrot. Let's put him in this year-long leadership development program. What did that lead? Did that lead to anything? No. I was the only person out of our whole group that looked like me that didn't get, and I'm not entitled, right? There's no entitlement. I work hard for everything I get, right? But it didn't happen. So I said, all right, circumstantial, whatever, didn't happen. Go to a different company, same situation. You're great, yada, 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 yada. We just need you to talk to more people around the company, get yourself known. And we're going to put you in a leadership development program, right? And I told my boss at the time, I said, I don't want to be put in. I've been through leadership. I got my master's degree in business administration, MBA. My undergrad is in business management. I did a year-long leadership program in a previous company that I was with, national company that I was with, right? Went through all of these things. I don't need to go through another management. I don't need a carrot. If it's not happening, let's have that conversation and let me figure out where my exit is. And that's great, right? But I felt like I had to code switch in those environments, right? And for me, it didn't work, in my estimation. I didn't feel like it worked, right? So I got tired of putting on. And that's what I considered my put on.
Like when I first got my role, I had like this big afro, and just the impact on my kids alone to see like, wait, my vice principal, he's young, he's black, he has an afro, he wears a dashiki sometimes. Like,
what's going on?
Wait, what? Like they had it redefined what professional was for them. One of the things I often try to advocate, this is why I have these real conversations with my kids, is that I want them to show up their fullest self. I want them to get the education. Don't get me wrong, get the education, but leverage in a way that says, I got these tools, but I also have these assets that you did not take into account that are valuable, and I'm going to bring them to every space in which I show up. Because if not, then they will never be considered valuable. And so I just think it's very important that we be intentional about when and where we code switch, to the point where we know that I can stop switching the code so that I can change the code. If we always switch, we never change. I feel like there's like this racial background, like there's code switching that are precipitated on racial constructs that often oppress or disenfranchise a certain demographic based on the way they show up. That goes beyond a educational, a content, or a sector-based jargon. That's simply because I'm a black educator and I speak to kids a certain way. White educators feel some kind of way about that because I don't use their language when I speak to my kids, and that my kids respond differently to me than they do to them, right? And so now if I code switch, my kids will be looking at me like, what, Mr. Cool, really? Like, what you mean? Like, and so I think that when I talk about the problematic side of code switching is that when we continue to not show up on our full selves, like even when we do have the degrees, we have the credentials, and we have the expertise to say that this is who I am and this is how I represent, but I know that you want me to be yes sir, no sir, calm, cool, collected, and that's not who I am. Yeah. That does not open pathways for people after me who come just like me. Yeah. And so that's, to me, the problematic piece. Now, granted that we do need to be flexible and adaptable, but that doesn't mean I can't be myself. And when we define when we define flexibility and adaptability based on white norms only, that's when it's problematic.
I mean, so the terminology that I think has been really helpful for me is cultural dexterity, right? Which is to say that actually I'm not changing my values. I'm not changing who I am in any way. But when I enter any room, I enter any space, I enter any environment, whether it be corporate, whether it be a different country, whether it be a different part of this country, right? That I understand the cultural norms and values of that space, and I respect those intrinsically for what they are. So I enter that space and I act appropriately, not in conflict with those, but actually seeing the value in those. It's never changing myself, right? I mean, the example would be that, I used to do a lot of work in the Middle East, and, you go to a Middle Eastern market and people are yelling and screaming, and I'm in there. And to be successful in that market, I need to be aggressive, I need to be loud, I need to be boisterous, I need to be all this. But if I take that same approach when trying to negotiate something at an airport counter, looking the way I do, it's going to get a very different reaction. One's going to get me the deal and the other one's going to get me in jail, right? And so I think for me, that terminology has really helped me in this space. The thing that I think about a lot, there's a quote that helps guide my life, actually inspires me quite a bit. There's a Picasso quote that says, learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. And when I think about cultural dexterity and when I think about power just generally, I'm often thinking about, I need to have a good, keen understanding of what are the rules of this space. If I learn those like a pro, and I've been able to have mastery of those, then I'm able to operate and actually do what Bakari was saying, which is push the entire bell curve over, right? With what is acceptable, with what is possible, because I understand, because I've learned it like a pro, so now I can break them like an artist.
Is there anything that you've consciously sacrificed that maybe it's a short-sighted gain or maybe it's a long-term gain, but that you've consciously sacrificed in effort of this pursuit, right?
I think I don't know if it's a sacrifice, but I think to do that and to do it justice and truly try to understand the values of any given group that I may be interacting with, it takes a discipline of understanding yourself and your own values. And it also takes, I think, it's a lot of mental energy, right? Yeah. So it's not efficient.
You realize you really can get exhausted just mentally. I didn't think it was a real thing until I started trying to take on these things. I'm exhausted, but I haven't done any physical exercise. And you realize that the weight of some of these things. So why, and the thing I've been pushing myself on a lot lately, and I'm curious, because I feel all the people who enter this space carry a bit of this weight, is like, there are people who, for the sake of equally conscious, that choose not to take on the weight, right? Mm. So I think to denote consciousness, I know, so I must do, is unfair to say. So why have each of you, why have you decided to take on that weight?
I mean, I think for me, at the end of the day, if I'm fully living out my personal values, then I have to be true to that. I mean, the other. So I shared the one quote, the Picasso quote, which influences me a lot. But the other quote that I really try to live by, it's ultimately the essence of what I do, is a Paulo Coelho quote that says, "The world changes by your example, not your opinion." Right. And so for me, I can have all the opinions I want in the world. I can have all the beliefs I want in the world, but how I carry myself, how I act, how I spend my money, how I choose to spend my time, who I am, what I say, what I do, that ultimately is going to impact my legacy and impact the world around me more than anything I could ever say or think or tweet or post or write or whatever.
So one episode, you made me think, one episode we got on spending, we talked a lot about it. I think, who brought that up? India Williams actually started talking a lot about buying black and this idea of, and you mentioned the word buying. Is that something you guys think about or that you push towards, or in terms of like buying black, owning black? Or I shouldn't say black, right? But I should say the specificity of targeting something.
I mean,
over
buying your values. I mean, so for instance, I think for me, I got to a point in my life where compassion and a true value for all living things mattered immensely, right? And so to me, I extend that beyond just the human realm, but into the animal. I always lose people here, but into the animal space.
No.
And so I think for me, so we adopted a vegan lifestyle, my family and I, right? And so that means that, does that mean is it going to be a little bit more expensive on the bill? Yeah. Does that mean, but at the end of the day, is it going to be a little awkward sometimes when you go someplace? Yeah, all those things are a cost, right? But at the end of the day, I'm living out my values in a really authentic way, right? Now, that said, if I find myself in an environment where, this is where I think I'm also living out my values, because if I find myself in an environment where I'm a guest in somebody's home and they don't know that I'm vegan and they serve me something, the value in cherishing all humanity and cherishing community more broadly, I'm going to accept that service offering, right? They've brought something to me, to the table, right? Even though it's in conflict with my personal values, because I think that's where there's a values tension between the two, right? The rigidity in that moment actually does, I think, more harm to the humanity that I'm trying to perpetuate than oh, you give me that look, so I'll see it. I spend a lot of my time raising funds, and a lot of the time the folks that I'm raising funds with, or I'm interacting with, our school partners or whatever, have some troubling mindsets about kids. And I take it very personally, because growing up in a low-income community, person of color from Kansas City, first-generation high school grad, first-generation college student, I take all that stuff very personally, right? But for me, it also comes at a cost at times to figure out when is the right moment to help. Bridge something.
You very consciously pick and choose and navigate that.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, I feel like sometimes in those rooms, my very presence in the room is living out my values, right?
Yeah.
But I also know that with that comes a deep responsibility to leverage that seat, leverage that privilege in a way that is actually not just helping me personally, but it's helping all the kids like me that are coming up. I would have loved, when I was a kid, working my ass off, right, trying to make grades, trying to figure out the world, trying to be the first one to graduate high school, trying to be the first one to get in college, all that stuff, trying to get my first job, trying to do all the things that we were just talking about. I would have loved, it would have helped me sleep better at night to know that there was somebody like me who had gone that same path, that was out there sort of smoothing the path over, planting some flowers, making it a little easier, right? Yeah. And so I feel like that's a lot of my role. And so everything I do, both in terms of how I spend my time, to what I put in my mouth, to what I buy, whatever, would it be more convenient to just go with the status quo? Of course it'd be more convenient. But at the end of the day, I'm living out my values in a more authentic and real way.
And it's interesting, right? Acknowledging a defeat. Or is it, I don't want to get too lost into this world, but is it a defeat, This idea of the thing before the thing, right?
I think early in my life, I saw it as a zero-sum game, right? It's win and loss. I think now
is it part of youthfulness, do you think? Because I feel like every young person looks at it as a zero-sum game.
I don't know if it's just young people. I think it's just one of those things that it's a mindset. It's a mindset thing, right? And I don't know that it's something you grow out of. I think for me, I've now shifted. And it's painful to shift it this way, but shifted my mindset to say there's not wins and losses, it's wins and lessons, right? And so when I get the harsh feedback that I'll be vulnerable here, we'll take it here. I've gotten the feedback in my career that I interrupt women more often than I interrupt men. That I maybe am less open to ideas. I think that there's been some challenges across gender lines from time to time. And when I've gotten that feedback, my first reaction was always like, "What are you talking about?
No.
I'm cool. What? Really? What?" I'm too woke. And so to me, that I think there was a time in my life when I viewed that as a loss.
Right.
And instead, now I go like, wait, that's a gift, because they just gave me feedback that if I can actually incorporate it, I can actually improve upon this.
Actually look and just be honest with yourself and say.
Because how often are people honest with you, right? How often do you actually get that level of honesty? And so when you get that feedback truly is a gift, whether you're ready to accept it, whether you're ready to act on it or not. So I think for me that's been the big shift. the thing that, so as somebody who grew up low income, I think the thing that often still frustrates me most today is when I hear people talk about low income communities and there's the assumption that they are needy, right? I think I'm not saying you are, right? But I think you know, or they assume things about my household, right? And so growing up, I had stability, I had love. Did I have people in my life that had college degrees and knew the rules, right? Knew the rules and knew them like a pro and knew how to break them like an artist? No, I didn't have those people, right? But what I did have is people who had an ethical background that instilled that into me very strong. And I also had a community that, you know, that was very self-reliant, right? So we talk about police, and I don't want to go down a police brutality route. I actually don't think in my neighborhood we often thought about police as antagonists. We just saw them as apathetic or inept figures, right? And at least from my vantage point, right? So the house gets broken into. Why would you bother calling the cops, right? What are they going to do, right? And so when I talk about self-reliance, I mean, like, if we had an issue, you know, we'd go to our neighbor. What did you see? How are we going to solve this problem? How are we going to keep this from happening again? And so I think sometimes to this point about doing to instead of doing with, I think when I think about the difference between, from an entrepreneur standpoint, you know, I mean, people in low-income backgrounds, regardless of whether they're in the urban core or the rural poverty or whatever, I think the makeup of an entrepreneur, like you've got it there. They're resilient. They're tenacious. They're used to, you know, making ends meet on a small budget. They're oftentimes used to presenting themselves as having more than they have, right? So they're used to that oversell, right? They're used to having that outfit they go to Sunday church or whatever, right? And putting on, right, in a way that in a sales environment probably actually would benefit you, right? There are all those sorts of things. I think the biggest challenge is access to capital. It's access to capital, and its second thing is that when that first venture fails, it's access to that next opportunity, that third, fourth, fifth opportunity, right? Because I think whenever I think about folks from a more affluent background, not only do they have the access to the capital, but if they fail, they've got the safety net.
Failing
so they're going to get that second try.
Learning.
I mean, I had I'm not going to say who, but I had somebody that was in my realm who was trying to explain why they were just like the student population they were serving. And they went through how, I got kicked out of this college and I went to this other college, I got kicked out, I went to this other college, I got kicked out, but I stuck with it, and boom. And in my mind, I was like, if I got kicked out of that first college, that would have been it, right? And so I think that's the thing. And again, if I'm from a humanity standpoint, if I put myself on the other end of that and I think about the risk associated with the investment, right? I actually don't know that I can, in that framework, that I can fault the other player. But I think that's where you have to find people who have that perspective and that approach, that find themselves on the other side. And then once on the other side, are actively trying to change that dynamic, right? And it sounds like that's what you're trying to do. I don't want to speak on it, but it sounds like.
So my background is in anthropology, and when I think of that, like, we got to give context to all this, right? Like, when we talk about underserved communities, often underserved communities, that there's a correlation between being underserved and being a person of color. There's a real reason, a very intentional, created reason why that's the case. And unfortunately, because of how us humans, how we experience each other, how our brains try to get things into little boxes and into patterns, we correlate those things not on basis of the history, but on basis of the value of the people who wear a certain skin color, who live in a certain area of the city. And I think there's very real context that we have to bring into that context, like historic redlining, context like blockbusting, context like racially restrictive covenants, like the way that we value property, that has led to buildups in capital in certain folks, but not other folks, which is why, like, going and so people who look like me intentionally trying to use, which I don't know how many people like me do this, but I'm not even saying I do this well, but like, if I can use my money to support business owners of color to try to get it out of white communities, like, I feel like that's a really easy step that needs to happen, because capitalistically, wealth has been held and the system has been built by white people to support white male capital owning people. And because many of the big organizations are now run by white male property owners, I don't have much faith in white male owners to give more reparations than for big organizations to give money. You see what I'm saying?
No.
Like, no.
More.
So I think we need reparations. That's what I'm saying. I think that like that is reparations of some sort would be justice because of what people that look like me have done historically in this country.
When you say reparations, what do you mean?
Well, I'm talking about you named capitalism. I'm saying
So you feel like white folks need to
capitalistically.
pay black people?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be upset about it. I can be honest. I wouldn't be upset. I wouldn't be upset.
Obviously, wealth. We talk about generational wealth. That's a conversation to be had. But from a top down, like you said, a systematic approach, absolutely, 100%. From a bottom up, it's a totally different conversation. If you have money, you can afford better health care.
Right.
If you have money, you can afford better food. If you have financial well-being, you can afford to put yourself into different places that actually afford you an opportunity to be in a better position through life. So I get it from a systematic approach, absolutely, 100%. Top down, system needs to change, but realistically, that 1 in 100, 1 in 100, 1 in 100.
But why is it not realistic to
1 in
expect the
100.
system to
1 in
change?
100 what?
That's
Why
how,
is it?
That is how we continue in this current state of existence. Because we always say, well, realistically, here's what I have to do. I have to code switch in order to get to the table.
Is it real?
I have to be the safe Negro in order to be invited into the door.
So what you're saying is value. It's valid and
it's valued, it's valid, but it's not realistic.
However,
what?
so you as an educator,
Yes.
right? Top down, I love, the premise of the switch, right? When you switched from what you were to what you're doing now and how you're leading now, right? I love it, right? In
Well,
your system.
how I'm attempting to lead that.
Attempting to, right? Which takes time,
Right.
which you work teacher by teacher, student by student. You're not going up to the school board. You're not going up to Dr. B and saying, hey, look at these high schools across the board. This is what changes. This is what you need to do to change. This is what we need to do. This is what we're doing in my position. This is what I'm doing. This is what works, yada, yada, so forth and so forth. Which is not to say it couldn't happen. I'm not saying that it can't happen. However, the likelihood of your direct involvement in your change is going to happen where you are.
So that's why.
So you can't ignore bottom up.
You cannot. I agree.
You cannot ignore bottom up.
But even when I was a classroom teacher, without any authority beyond the 24
Sure.
kids I was serving,
Sure.
I was advocating.
Which is
I
dope.
was a voice.
Which
so
is dope.
so I was
I'm
going.
not nixing
But-
anything that you're saying.
And I'm not saying you are, but I think that so that bottom up can still be a voice from the top down, right?
Again,
And so like
it's disruptive change. The way it happens is from the bottom up, forcing someone that's comfortable to be uncomfortable. And that's the only way bottom up that those things change.
But
Top
we will never make
those things don't change if you're not uncomfortable.
Right, but we will never make the comfortable uncomfortable if we are always playing the comfort game. And so when I heard you, but when I heard you say just now, that's what made me sit up. It's like that's not quite like you. I heard you say like this bottom up mindset of. But it gives you greater access to healthcare, like money, and it does.
It does.
I don't disagree. But I think there's still something to be had around like changing system, like thinking systemically.
Absolutely.
I think that's part of the game. That's part of the capitalistic supremacist system is that we don't give you enough capacity to think beyond your current existence. That you are still working from day to day. So we are over here playing a long game. We're strategic about our moves, and you still trying to figure out tomorrow.
Because that's
That's underserved.
Because that hustle, again, is real. Your day to day, when you can't see beyond the four walls to put food on the table and yada, yada, and yada, so forth and so on, guess what? You're not in a position to change systems when you're trying to keep a roof over your head. But again, in Chris's position, when you get people that actually pull themselves up and are able to put themselves in
You're
a position
contradicting
that,
yourself.
No, I'm not.
You
it's
are.
Top up. It's top bottom up.
because you're saying that the enslaved African cannot think about freedom. That's exactly what you're saying.
I'm not saying that.
You're saying
I'm
that
saying the only way that these systems are going to change is if that person decides they have to go beyond
But you just said they don't have the capacity to do so.
They don't traditionally, but guess what? You're gonna have to.
But you just also said that they
You're gonna
traditionally
have
that's the
to.
only way it's changed.
But you're gonna have to.
We have changed.
But
You're
the
gonna
systemic
have to.
in multiple.
So I definitely think that to some extent, I agree with what you're saying, that it does start at a very localized, I'm not okay with my current situation. I want something different. But then I also feel like there's this conversation I hear you saying is that I recognize I don't like my current situation, but I don't really have the capacity to do something different. And what I'm articulating is that once you don't like something, you are beginning to be able to change that something you don't like. So when enslaved Africans said, I don't like being enslaved, they fought against it. They rebelled.
There's two conversations, right? Because there's some that do, and there's some that didn't. There's some that did, and there's some that didn't. There's not a one. It's not a
one size fits all.
One size fits
You're right.
all conversation. So they're are gonna be individuals that are not gonna be able to think outside of those four walls. But then you're gonna have those folks that are gonna expand that thought, right? And get
so maybe then I guess
four
I'm
walls.
just pushing to have a more inclusive conversation around that includes both of those perspectives, because too often we get into these like very narrow generalizations of
Which you can't.
here's what it is, and like when I heard you say like, well, the reality says that it has to be a top down. They have to be willing to change before the bottom up can change, like, because that's what I heard you say.
No, that's
no?
no, that's not it.
What did you say then?
I said
We have
they're
to look at it
not.
from that perspective as well.
If you don't have disruption, right, from the bottom up, in my opinion, it's just my opinion. If folks are comfortable in these seats and they don't feel there's a reason to change, they won't.
No,
Unless
but
there's something that's gonna disrupt
Because we were
that
talking about
conversation.
systems, and we were talking about individuals, and you talked about, well, reality. That was a phrase that triggered me. It was like, well, in reality, here's what it is, and my push is that why can't we expect systems to actually
Why can't it
change?
be realistic that systems can change?
Exactly.
Can I give the answer that I feel is?
Yeah, that's why you're here, man. That's why you are
Thanks.
here, my friend.
So what makes me feel pessimistic is that the problem is you have the whole arc of history, in my opinion, is toward the consolidation of power. You have people in power.
Dr. King said it bends toward justice.
I love Dr. King, but that's one thing that I'm saying.
But in reality,
Right.
There you go. Like I don't want to put my stake in the ground arguing with Dr. King.
Not the sanitized version, at least.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Anyway, so there's a lot of consolidation of power that we have in history, right? So there's people who hold power now. To change systems, they have to give up power. We were talking about that earlier, and I think like a big obstacle is like there might be some white people like, so a lot of those folks are white, right? There might be some white folks like me who are like, damn, like this shit is done f***ed up. We need to fix it. Like I want to release my power if I can. Like I want to just let go of it. Not the majority of white folks though. Not the majority at all. So like that's the obstacle, right? Like that's what I'm hearing you say, that you have to somehow make it.
Okay,
You got to take power, or you
There it
convince-
is.
or you
So
gotta
right.
convince white people that it's in their best interest to let go.
Yeah, that's yeah.
And a mentor of mine used to always talk about this term, enlightened self-interest. And I never got to a point if I agreed or disagreed. I would just listen. Is that a familiar term with everyone? Before I keep going. Right. And here's what's interesting. Context is so powerful, right? Is that so the role she served was within the College of Business at K-State, and was essentially in recruiting students, particularly diverse students, and then getting them employed, right? And this idea of a diverse workforce and that our communities are changed to become more diverse in the year 20-something, yada, yada, there'll be more people of color. Right? Enlightened self-interest, that it is, Pepsi, it is in your best interest to hire people of color to best understand your market, right? So this idea of enlightened self-interest, in that now people in power say, okay, it is in my best interest to allow these people into the spaces of making decisions and influencing our organization. The thing that I always got caught up on, and I don't know if this is the place to get caught up on, but it's have I already sacrificed too much in taking that road? Because everyone who has this morality says, I'll get in and change it. And then one or two things happen, right? You can confine to that situation and you get comfortable as well.
What I'm hearing when I hear this conversation, what I'm hearing is that there is a role for both folks that are within the system to be disruptive and folks outside of the system to be disruptive. And it actually takes getting pressure from both to actually see change over time, right? I think one of the things that is challenging about being within the system, and I've faced this myself, right, which is that we were talking about the two cities, and I said, well, the point was I told you I experienced two Kansas cities, right? I experienced the Kansas City being in a low-income environment, and then the low-income side of Kansas City, right, where I had to fight for every opportunity, and then I went away, got college educated, traveled the world, whatever, and I came back and I experienced the other side of Kansas City, which is like, oh, hey, he's been around, he's credentialed, he's hit all the check boxes, whatever, and that's a different Kansas City that I've experienced. I said free parking. I said oh, free parking. That's the different. I think the challenge is that the more you're in the free parking camp, the less incentivized you are to disrupt the system. It is more seductive to be part of the system because you're benefiting from it. Right. It's great, right? So I think that's part of the challenge. But I think if you really are, if at least for me, if we're really living out my values, then I take those opportunities to be disruptive from within.
What part of your life story has meant the most to you, has impacted you the most, that you reflect on the most, has inspired you, whatever the case, and then we'll wrap up.
We'll start that way because I've been starting over here.
That's a pretty major question. I will say that coming into education, the portion of my life that's impacted me the most is I was always like the young black kid who everyone said was going to be great and like successful. I didn't know what the hell that meant. No one actually ever was intentional about showing me what that meant. It was just like, oh, you're a smart one. You're going to go to this class. You're going to go to that class. You're different than the rest of those other Negroes is what I've really heard, like reflecting back. But at the same time, no one really invested in me. And I felt like I was just very middle of the road. Like I didn't see what was so special about me. And not until I was like in middle school, then I had a personality and I was ridiculous. But as a teacher, like that was my goal. Like as an educator, that was often my goal, is that I wanted to reach those people who were often overlooked, like were just kind of the middle of the road, overlooked, because I felt it was my story, that people spoke very highly of me, but did not put the work in necessary to really cultivate my talents and to cultivate my uniqueness. It was just like, oh, you're different than the rest of the Negroes, so you're going to be good. And I became kind of like that one in my family, like, we expect you to make it and save the rest of us type of thing. And not to discount my oldest sister graduated from college. We're the only two in our family. And so I feel like that really impacted my journey. And it wasn't until I actually got to college, went to Langston University, shout out to LU, and I really found myself as an individual and like what it meant to own my agency and to own my talents in a way that not only manifested greater opportunities for myself, but also for those who came after me. Because that's when I really first started recognizing that I have an obligation to my community in a way that I never knew before. Because we're the only HBCU in Oklahoma, the most Western HBCU in the United States. And there was a lot of conversation around HBCU versus PWI in Oklahoma. And so I had the opportunity to be in a lot of spaces in predominantly white spaces representing my university. And it was always like, well, tell me about your education at Langston. And it's like, you wouldn't know I went to Langston until I told you I went to Langston, because oftentimes they assumed because I was the articulate black male that I had a different pedagogy or pedigree behind me. And so I would say that just being kind of like that, expected to be successful but without ever having the intentionality of developing my talents and my success has really played a major role in how I'm very intentional about the conversations I have with the kids in which I serve. Because as I tell everyone I work with, I try to speak life into my kids, but not just speak it into them, but work it into them as well. And that I show them through my actions that you are worthwhile and that you are valuable simply because you are breathing, not because you meet X, Y, and Z's expectations. but because you are a living, breathing human being that the world needs you. And it is my goal to help you figure out how to contribute to the world in the most meaningful ways possible.
Can I just point out too, it looked like an MC, like a true MC.
Yeah, the way he was holding it. He was like it was on purpose.
Sorry, I just had to point that out.
Can you restate the question, sir?
Yeah, man. What part of your life story has meant the most to you?
Man, I don't know anything except what I've had the privilege to listen to from out of other people's mouths. And that's meant the most to me. That what's meant the most to me is that I've gotten the opportunity to listen to people, and I've believed those people, and that has shaped me. If I had chosen to disbelieve people, to say their suffering wasn't real, to say that they weren't really experiencing racism, to say that they weren't really experiencing sexism or whatever, I would be an unchanged suburban white male. But I've had the opportunity, the privilege to get to hear people and listen to them, and I'm so glad I did, because that's defined my purpose, which is to hopefully use this skin color of mine to speak in spaces where I can sort of sneak in, and no one knows that I'm going to be an anti-racist, but I really hope that they leave knowing that I am. So there was a moment in college. Okay, maybe this is it, and then I'll shut up. I grew up very conservative Christian, and then I went to school and studied anthropology, and there were conservative white Christians in my life who said to me, "Whoo, you don't want to study anthropology? Like, are you sure? Like, that's like, man, they're gonna mess you up." And they were right. But I'm really glad. Like, I'm really thankful for that, because I remember taking religion and culture, and man, there was this very specific moment where we did a human scatter plot. Have you guys ever heard of this before? Human scatter plot. Okay, so it's like you're in a rectangular room, and the walls become axes. The walls become the ends of an axis, so that, like, if you're at the front of the room or the back of the room, it's like a degree of intensity, and then there's a question where the left or the right of the room is on or something. So the question was, The question was, do you believe in God or not, and with what intensity? So, like, I'm way up in the corner, like, I believe in God, and it's as intense as it gets. And then there's people who are like, I don't believe in God, and it's as equally intense as it gets. So the professor, who's a dear friend of mine now, asked me, like, hey, would anyone volunteer from opposite corners to explain their rationale? And so I did. And then he invited someone from the opposite corner to explain away my rationale. And, like, there was this girl who gave this extremely simple answer. She was just like, well, Nathaniel, it sounds like throughout your life you've just tried to belong, and that's what has informed your belief. And then whatever happened for the rest of class, I had no idea, because my world just melted, and I was in a fog for, like, days afterwards. And I'm so thankful for that moment, because my reality just was destroyed. And that was so good, because it gave me the opportunity to question everything, and nothing was off limits at that point. Everything that I believed to be true at that point became grounds for just unlimited interrogation, and I think that's what has allowed me to then ask people questions, and then to believe them, and to understand the subjectiveness of perspective.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, for sure. As far as for, my story, I think I shared just being on both ends of two worlds in Kansas City. I think that if I really boil it down, though, to what kind of brought me to this place of realizing that I need to live my values out in as most authentic way as possible, there was a period of time over summer when I was in grad school where, to try to make it short, basically I was on a very different career path. I thought I was going to work in intelligence work, work in diplomatic work, do a lot of work overseas, and just live the jet set life, and really just, now that the world of opportunities was open to me, I was going to drink from that teat as long as possible. Right? I was just going to go out and that was the idea. And at the same, so over the period of a month, I was living in DC. I had this experience where you were talking about the Desmond Tutu, where I was at this gathering of a handful of, it was about 100 world leaders, people like Desmond Tutu, Barack Obama before he was president, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I mean, Pulitzer Prize winners, Nobel Prize winners, everybody together, and then 200 of who were deemed the world's top postgraduate students. And so I found myself in that space and thought, wow, if I just continue on this path, I'm gonna end up like one of these folks. I'm gonna be here. This is gonna be good, right?
Mm-hmm. Things will turn out pretty good.
A couple weeks later, I was doing research in the Middle East and was actually kidnapped by Hezbollah, which is a terrorist group, and thought I was gonna die, basically. Got out of that experience, made my way back home, and a couple weeks later, I got married. And I think on that honeymoon, I spent a lot of time thinking about, what do I want to do with this privilege, right? So I had certain hardships growing up and certainly certain privileges. Light skin privilege, private school educated, college educated now, different socioeconomic status. What do I want to do with all of this? And I think at the end of the day, I was very mindful of the fact that I wasn't defined by neither my hardships nor my privileges, but what I did with them, right? And I think that led me down a path of, I want to be an amazing father and husband, just something that was never modeled in my life. And I think that's where the insecurity comes, is that I don't have, I think we were talking before, I don't have a blueprint. You know, I don't have, I think from pretty early age, I felt like, you know, there was not a mentor or a guide in my life, right? And so there's a bit of a feeling of playing with house money a little bit, right? That like I'm not sure,
as much to lose.
but there's a liberation in that too.
Yeah.
That there's no predetermined path for me that somebody's figured out, right? And there's no expectations I have to live up to in that. But now thinking about raising my girls, I have 5 girls that are all under the age of 6, and I think about, you know, what type of dad I want to be. Yeah.
Let's take a moment.
I mean, I just think about,
God.
I think about what are the values I want to instill in them. You know, we were talking about this cultural dexterity piece, and at the same time, I think a lot about that. You know, Chris Rock has this joke that, you know, he grew up hating rich kids, and now he has 3 of them living in his house. And I think that I don't have Chris Rock money, but I definitely, you know, my kids are fundamentally living a different world than I grew up in. And yet I feel like a lot of what I lean on for the skill development and what's got me to this place is the environment that shaped me. And so I don't know how I there are a lot of thoughts in my mind about how I raise my girls to understand
want to have those same principles and values and
and so and ultimately at the end of the day, my legacy is going to be far more tied to what my girls do with their lives than it is what I do in mine, right? And so I've just spent a lot of time thinking about that. I think that's where I'm at mentally. So the part of my story I think that means the most and is most consequential is probably the moment I'm in now, as I'm forming these little lives that ultimately will, you know, I think benefit from a lot of the privileges of society. And so how are they going to use that to be disruptive themselves?
One of my biggest things that really shifted my life was growing up and you're being told you're going to be dead in jail based on, you know, your environment, you know, and the color of my skin, it was either education, dead, or in jail. I always looked up and admired the people who were in the streets because they always had that against the grain mentality. Basically, I got caught in a situation where I was looking at 15 years of prison, man. And they booked me in. I'm locked up in my jail cell, 1,200, and I'm looking at the time. I'm like, man, I'm innocent. I'm innocent. I didn't have the money to afford a lawyer, so I had to go with a public defender. So I'm like,
trying to prove your innocence.
Trying to prove my innocence as a black man.
Oh, that's a tough road.
As a black man. And all of my first cousins, they were in prison decades. You know, some of them got decades. Some of them are dead. You know, so it's like I was just in prison thinking about, oh, I know I'm innocent, but I'm trapped in this cage. I'm trapped looking at this. I'm trapped in this cold. I'm trapped eating this nasty food. I'm trapped around this environment where people are not nourishing me. You know, I feel stripped of my privilege. you know? And while I was just behind bars, I was just thinking, like, if I ever get free, I'm gonna love, like, the impact that I'm gonna create is I'm gonna create a system that gives people who are in these risky situations or who don't have an opportunity and they're out here trying to create crime and all that stuff because of lack of opportunity. I want to create systems that provide that opportunity. And then there's people who I felt like they were the most wise, who were in the streets, but they lacked the systems to get ahead and create opportunities for their families in a righteous way. So I wanted to basically be this person to elevate that creative expression. I mean, because I feel like that's God's gift, the ability to create. And then being able to elevate these people with these wise minds in a way that is more righteous, that creates more of an impact for our people, generations behind us, that's not just dead or in jail. It's basically giving opportunity. That's basically giving influence. That's basically giving power. That's basically giving ownership into our lives and being able to create impact for those next generations. So that's what led me to here today.
That's dope, man.
Yeah.
I guess I'm next, right? I guess I'm last.
That's how it works.
This is the direction I chose. That was crazy. I didn't know that you went overseas and kidnapped and.
How long was it? If I'm gonna ask.
I'll tell you this.
Yeah.
Being interrogated by terrorists is very good training for having 6 daughters. I'll tell you that much.
Tell you that.
There you
Right
go.
now.
You got to fall back on your, you know.
I'll tell you that right now.
Your training. Something that helped me realize that things were possible was, you know, as an entrepreneur, you think about improving something, or you think about fixing something or doing something better or creating something new, whatever the case may be. So short story long, whatever. I started a business when I was 20 and it was a maintenance company. And the way this came about was with a couple friends of mine riding. He had to go pick up a couple dollars from his uncle, and his uncle was a maintenance guy at an apartment complex over on the KCK side. We could create a company and we could do the work for him. He can contract, right? I didn't know what none of that was at the time. I was just like, we could do the work for him. So we called him up the next day. He was like, look, you got a problem. We got a resolution to your problem. We can solve that problem. He said, hey, yeah, that's cool, but you got to have a company. You have to have a business. You have to be something. So we said, all right, cool. We'll look it up. We'll figure it out. So we went, filed an LLC, didn't know what that was at the time, yada, yada, so forth and so on. Long story short, went back. He put us in contact with the development company that owned the different apartment complex, Section 8 units across the city, Kansas and Missouri. Gave us 3 contracts. We took pictures offline of dirty toilets and clean toilets, dirty bathrooms, clean bathrooms, dirty kitchens, clean kitchens. Nothing that we did, right? We didn't do any of this work. We just made it up. Hustle. That was the hustle, right?
Hustle.
Put a presentation together.
I loved it,
took it to the development company. Said, look, this is what you guys need. This is what we could do. Yada, yada. Wasn't expecting to actually get anything out of it. We were just kind of why not? Why not? Let's try it, right? My aunt was a screen printer. She worked for a print design company. Went to her and said, hey, we need a couple two polos that had Smith & Thompson maintenance, because my business partner's Thompson. Smith & Thompson, can you make these for us? Yep, cool, $5, $10, something like that. Cool, so we went in this meeting, had polos with our name, got the presentation. You know, we're 20, so we're just like, we could do this. What do we need to do to get this, to do that for you? Guy, the developer owner said, cool. We'll give you three different complexes across the city so you can work with. Okay, now we got to figure out how to do the work, right? So we took cleaning supplies from my mom's, our mom, like my mom and his mom's kitchen. We didn't have any. We took bleach. We took scrubbers. Mom came home after work like, where's my cleaning supplies? I got you. Don't worry about it. We're taking care of it. End up growing it to, I think we ended with 15 different contracts. End up taking on their ground services, cleaning up their grounds, not only doing make-ready units. So we went in, people get kicked out, and we went through the worst of worst. And I was okay with it, right? Because I own this business, but we had to clean shit. We cleaned shit off of stairwells. You're like, who the hell takes a shit on stairwells? We did that, put gloves on, got some disinfectant stuff, whatever it was. We researched, found what the best products were. There's a cleaning company off of Blue Ridge Boulevard. We went out there, learned all about their cleaning supplies, start getting supplies from them. They start giving it to us wholesale. So we didn't pay, a ton of money for it. I mean, just all this stuff, and it happened, right? And I saw it happen. I lived it, and I went through it. Now, at the end of the day, we end up having to sell the business because we did too much, right? We overbid, we overshot because we weren't prepared. We didn't have a business plan. We didn't have anything. We weren't prepared at all. But we lasted for about 2.5, 3 years doing this work. And we ended up going to Labor Ready. We was picking up, there's no offense, we was picking up folks from Home Depot that stand in front of Home Depot looking for work. It was like, hey, hop in. I'm gonna take you to the site. I need you to clean these areas, yada, 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 yada. We're gonna come back, pick you up, take you back to your spot. We'll pay you cash. We did all that and for 2.5 years. And we made a lot of money, but we were young and dumb, spent a lot of money, was in the clubs, acting stupid. It was the worst experience. It was horrible, right? But when somebody comes to me and says, I can't do something, I just have this, that's not true, right? That's a lie. So I know it's contradictory from me from saying my top down, right? However, that's kind of the perspective I go. So anytime I go in and talk to kids, I literally say you could be anything that you want to be, because you literally at some point in time, what you're naming that you want to be, someone has been before with hard work, dedication. They've gotten to where they want to be. And I truly believe, if you put in hard work and you do dedicate yourself to it, you can be whatever it is that you want to be.
Chef Jay in the building. What's up, y'all? What's going on? All right, so segment 3, Innovator's Toolbox. What is one piece of advice, one reflection you would leave to improve the experiences of tomorrow's generation? It can be high level. It could just be something that you're meditating on lately. It could be something that you heard walking in here. What's one piece of advice you would leave behind?
Move confidently in the direction of your dreams.
Move confidently in the direction of your dreams.
Can you just put fear?
Fear. Yeah. Do you want to give any context?
No, just say reach out to Dan Smith if you.
Come on. All right.
I was bad, right? I was horrible. Reach out, put my email address. Just fear.
Fear. All right.
Be willing to listen to understand other people's perspectives.
So I will go with this sort of a mantra of mine, which is have fun doing serious work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think so oftentimes we want to do serious work and be so serious and while at the same time there's lots of room to have fun, lots of room to be. I mean, if you're doing serious work, you're changing the world. You should be having a great time.
I would say take time to understand the context of where you come from and how you come from.
Tay, talk to me.
I would say take direction when creating your own path.
Take direction when creating your own path. I feel you. I do, kinda. Dan.
Get uncomfortable on a regular basis.
Rob.
My thing is, last few episodes ago I said nothing, right? And I feel like sometimes doing nothing gives you time to digest everything you've done and known and lets you apply it, versus like the society now is always efficiency, consumption. You always got to do the next thing. There's no time to like take a break and to actually apply what you've learned. And I think doing nothing sometimes gives you time to actually say, this is what I know and this is what I can do with it, versus like rushing to the next thing and messing up probably.
Yeah, that's so true. I guess I'll say, I don't know what your point was to fear, but I'll say do the thing you're most afraid to do. Yeah, because it's not wins and losses, it's wins and lessons. So just go and do it.
One, two. We hold each other accountable.
They say that there are 3 levels of conversation. Level 1 is when people talk about other people. Level 2 is when people talk about events. There's nothing wrong with either of those, but this is Level 3 Studio. Level 3 is when people talk about ideas and what is possible. Thank you so much for watching another episode of Level 3 Studio, where we fed your body, fed your mind, without a doubt, fed your soul. Boom.